At dinner, my mom set her fork down and placed it flat beside her plate. She didn't look angry. That's what made it worse. She said I had a month to find a new place. They'd sold the house. I wasn't going with them. No warning, no discussion. Just a statement delivered like a reminder about trash day. My dad stared at his plate as if something there required his full attention. My sister smiled, quick and contained, like she already knew how this would end. I waited for someone to laugh, for my mom to say she was joking, for my dad to clear his throat and correct her. Nothing happened. By morning, their suitcases were gone. The closets were empty. Family photos had been taken down, leaving lighter rectangles on the walls where we used to pretend things were fine. The house echoed in a way it never had before, like it was surprised I was still inside it. 6 months later, my phone buzzed while I was sitting in the living room. A message from my mom. "Why are you still there?" I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Then I laughed, quietly. She had no idea who owned that house. But to understand why, you have to know what kind of person my family thought I was back then. On paper, I looked fine. Mid-20s. Stable job. Tech. The kind of life people nod at and move on from. In real life, it meant long hours, cold coffee, and a brain that never fully powered down. I didn't talk about it much. I never learned how to make ordinary things sound impressive. I've always been quiet, not shy, not anxious, just unnoticed. If you passed me in a grocery store, you wouldn't remember my face. My family never did. At home, I took up as little space as possible. I spoke when spoken to. I listened more than I talked. Not because I was afraid, because in that house, attention came with conditions. From the outside, we looked normal. Decent neighborhood. Dinner together most nights. Holiday photos that made us look closer than we were. Inside, there was an order everyone understood without ever naming it. My mom set the tone. She decided what mattered, who mattered, and when the room felt warm or cold. Affection wasn't given. It was earned, and it could be taken back just as quietly. My dad rarely disagreed with her. He wasn't cruel. He was just. Absent when presence would have required effort. When things got tense, he found something fascinating on his plate. My sisters filled the space I didn't. Their voices were loud, confident, practiced. They had opinions about everything, especially me. At the table, they spoke freely. I measured every word. Over time, I learned something useful. If you don't ask for much, people stop noticing when they take everything. My name is Maya. I'm 26, and I work in tech. It sounds impressive when you say it like that. In reality, it mostly meant sitting in front of a screen for hours, solving problems no one saw, for people who never asked how it got done. I didn't talk about work at home, not because it was a secret, because no one ever seemed interested. If I mentioned a project, my mom would nod once and change the subject. My sisters treated it like background noise. My dad usually wasn't listening. To them, tech wasn't a career. It was something vague I did upstairs, alone, that didn't seem to be leading anywhere. I dressed plainly. No logos. No statements. I learned early that standing out invited commentary I didn't have the energy to manage. At family gatherings, people asked my sisters about their plans, their goals, their futures. When it was my turn, the questions were simpler. "So, are you still doing that computer thing?" I always said yes. Then I let the conversation move on without me. At home, usefulness mattered more than ambition. I paid my share. I covered my own expenses. I cleaned up without being asked. It kept the peace. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, I realized something uncomfortable. They weren't confused about who I was. They had already decided. And once a family decides where you belong in the hierarchy, everything they do after that feels justified to them. Even things they never would have said out loud. The pattern wasn't loud. That's why it lasted. Birthdays were small. Sometimes so small they were remembered late in the evening after dinner, when my mom suddenly realized the dates sounded familiar. Vacations were too expensive if I wanted to come, but somehow affordable when it was just them. I stayed home a lot, watched the house, cleaned up after people who barely noticed I was there. I learned how to be useful without being seen. By the time I was 16, I had a job after school, not for extra spending money, because asking my parents for anything felt like asking for permission to exist. When I got my first few paychecks, I didn't celebrate. I saved. A few months later, I bought myself a used laptop. It was old, heavy, and ran hot enough to warm my legs through the desk. It whined when it booted up, like it was already tired. But it was mine. At night, after the house went quiet, I sat on my bed and taught myself to code. No classes. No guidance. Just trial, error, and long stretches of silence. Code made sense in a way people didn't. You put the work in, something happened. No guessing. No moods. No favoritism. Still, nothing changed at home. I paid rent. Covered my bills. Stayed out of the way. They let me. I told myself it was temporary, that if I kept my head down, I could survive there a little longer. I didn't realize they'd already decided how replaceable I was. That dinner didn't start out any differently than the others. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and pepper. Plates clinked. My mom moved around with that tight, efficient energy she had when something was already decided and the rest of us just hadn't been told yet. I sat in my usual spot, shoulders still tense from work, telling myself to eat quickly and disappear upstairs. My dad cleared his throat once, then didn't say anything. My sisters leaned toward each other, whispering and smiling like they were sharing a joke I wasn't supposed to hear. Halfway through the meal, my mom set her fork down. "I need everyone's attention," she said, calm and measured. Then she looked straight at me. "Especially you." Something tightened in my chest. She still wasn't angry. That was the part that didn't let me relax. She spoke like she was reading off a list. The house had been sold. The paperwork was finished. They were moving. Tomorrow. I blinked. "Moving where?" "That's not important," she said. "What matters is that you'll need to find somewhere else to live." She paused, just long enough for the words to land. "You have a month." I looked at my dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands were folded on the table, knuckles pale. I turned to my sisters. The older one smirked. The younger one pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh. In that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't a discussion. It was an eviction. "Are you serious?" I asked. My mom nodded once. "Clean." "Certain." "We're not taking you with us." She said it like it was obvious. Like I was the one who'd misunderstood how families worked. My dad finally spoke. "You're an adult, Maya. You should have planned for this. Planned for my family selling the house without telling me." The younger one snorted. "Guess you better start packing." The older one smiled, slow and satisfied. "Tech jobs don't pay that well, right?" They laughed. Not loudly. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to sting. I waited for someone to stop it. For my mom to say that was enough. For my dad to step in. No one did. My food sat untouched, cooling on the plate. I felt that familiar pressure behind my eyes. I swallowed it down. Crying had never changed anything in that house. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "That's it," my mom said. "We've made our decision." They went back to eating, to talking about neighborhoods and schools, about how much lighter the new place would feel, like I was already gone. I sat there until my chair felt heavier than my body. Then I stood, murmured something about being tired, and went upstairs. I closed my bedroom door and leaned my forehead against it, listening to their laughter drift up the stairs. That was the moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't neglect anymore. It wasn't favoritism. It was disposal. And while they thought they just pushed me out of their lives, they had no idea they'd already stepped into something they couldn't control. They left the next morning. I woke up to the low rumble of an engine outside my window and the sound of doors closing with purpose. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I heard my mom's heels on the hardwood floor downstairs. Sharp. Final. By the time I reached the living room, boxes were stacked by the door. The couch was gone. The walls were bare where photos used to hang, pale outlines marking where memories had been removed. My dad stood by the window with the keys in his hand, already somewhere else. My mom adjusted her coat and glanced at me like she was checking off the last item on a list. "Remember," she said, "you've got a month. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for who? My sisters breezed past me, talking about new rooms, new schools, new beginnings. No one hugged me. No one asked if I was okay. The door closed behind them. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I stood there long after their car disappeared, listening to the hum of the refrigerator they hadn't bothered to take. Every sound felt amplified. My footsteps. My breathing. I walked through the house slowly, room by room. Empty shelves. Bare closets. A home reduced to a shell. And somehow, I was the only thing left inside it. That was when the weight finally settled in. Not panic. Not fear. Just the realization that they hadn't argued or hesitated. They'd made a clean break. They didn't forget me. They chose to leave me behind. What hurt most was how clean it had been. No shouting. No final fight. Just a decision they'd already moved past. I sat on the living room floor with my back against the wall and stared at nothing. This was usually the part where I blamed myself, where I replayed conversations, wondering what I should have done differently. But something colder settled in instead, because the truth was, this hadn't come out of nowhere. 2 months earlier, I'd been scrolling through listings late one night. Not seriously, just looking. That's when I saw it. My address. Photos of the house I was still living in. My room staged like I didn't exist. They put the house up for sale without saying a word. I remembered sitting there in the dark, laptop balanced on my knees, feeling hurt first, then angry, and then clear. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask questions. I didn't make a scene. I made a call instead. While they were packing boxes and planning their fresh start, I was quietly setting something in motion, something legal, something permanent. Standing in the empty living room now, I brushed the dust off my hands and took a slow breath. The house felt too big, too quiet, but for the first time, it also felt honest. They thought they'd abandoned me. What they didn't know was that this was the moment I stopped being the person they could step over without consequences. And the next time we spoke, the balance of power wouldn't belong to them anymore. 6 months passed. Not quietly, not magically, just steadily. The house changed first, not in any dramatic way, just intentionally. Empty rooms filled in. The echo disappeared. The kitchen smelled like coffee again. At night, the lights stayed on because I wanted them to, not because I was waiting for someone else to come home. I changed too. I slept better. I stood straighter. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. They never checked in. Not once. No, are you okay? No, did you find a place? In their minds, I think I'd already vanished. Then one afternoon, while I was working from the dining table, my phone vibrated. Mom. I didn't open it right away. When I finally did, there were only 6 words. Why are you still there? I let out a quiet breath through my nose. The kind of laugh that happens when the last piece clicks into place. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message came in, then a missed call, then another. I finished my work first. When I finally set my laptop aside, I felt calm, grounded. They were going to find out, and I wasn't going to rush it. That Saturday morning, a familiar engine pulled into the driveway. I didn't rush to the window. I already knew who it was. The doorbell rang once, then again. I took my time, smoothed my sweater, opened the door. They were all there, standing close together, like they expected to be let back into something that still belonged to them. My mom stepped inside first. Her smile froze the second she saw the living room, the couch, the rug, the art on the walls. My sisters looked around, confused. My dad stayed near the door. What is all this? My mom asked. I closed the door behind them. My house, I said. She laughed once, too quickly. That's not funny. I'm not joking. The room went quiet. You don't have that kind of money, she said. I shrugged. You'd be surprised what happens when no one's watching you. The truth came out slowly. Not numbers. Not details. Just facts. I'd seen the listing. I'd made a call. I'd bought the house legally. Everything was already done. My dad rubbed his temples. My sisters stopped smiling. My mom tried to soften her voice. Talked about stress, about needing help. I listened, then shook my head. You made your decision, I said. So did I. I opened the door. They left the same way they had before, quietly. I locked it behind them and leaned against the door. Justice didn't feel loud. It felt clean. And for the first time, the house was truly mine.